Last year, Apple released the iPhone X, which was one of the most significant updates to the iPhone in years. They replaced the LCD screen technology with OLED, removed the Touch ID fingerprint sensor, replacing it with Face ID, and extended the screen as close to the edge as they could. I was skeptical at first when looking at the iPhone X with its notch staring back at me, but it quickly became obvious that the iPhone X was a great phone. The gesture-based interactions were smooth and intuitive, and the notch faded away and became almost unnoticeable. With so many changes and updates to last year's iPhone, it was hard to imagine where they could go from there. What they came up with is the iPhone XS and XS Max. Now, in past years, when Apple had a smaller screen and a larger screen phone, there were other differences in the two devices besides the screen size. This year they changed it up, and both the smaller iPhone XS and the larger XS Max are largely the same. I personally have been using the iPhone XS, so much of what I say will be focused on that, but since the phones are so similar, much of it will apply to both devices. And I'm going to compare this year's iPhone to last year's iPhone X because that's what I was using before. And also because I think it's important to show what the changes are made year over year. The screen on the XS is the same 5.8-inch Super Retina OLED screen, 6.5-inch on the Max. If you had an iPhone X, you can expect an extremely similar experience looking at the XS. Apple has always made great looking screens, and the XS and XS Max are no different. They're bright, colorful, and the OLED gives you great looking blacks. The actual size of the iPhone XS is the same as the X. In past years, I had been using the plus size phone because I wanted the better camera features that came along with it. So I was really happy when Apple released the iPhone X because it put their best camera in the device size that I wanted to use. And that's also the reason why I purchased the iPhone XS instead of the XS Max. As with all new iPhones, the XS and the XS Max feature a new processor this year called the A12 Bionic. Again, this year Apple has introduced a processor that is incredibly powerful. But what does that mean for the average user? Not as much as you would think. Basically what this means is the iPhone XS is going to feel super fast and buttery smooth at everything you ask it to do. And I didn't really feel a difference when I switched from the X to the XS. They both felt really fast. Where this is going to come into play is a few years down the road, when the iPhone X might start to feel slow and the XS can keep up. Last year with the iPhone X, Apple introduced Face ID, the replacement to Touch ID, for unlocking your phone and doing any other action you would need to authenticate, such as logging into a banking app or making a purchase. Apple said Face ID is faster this year on the iPhone XS and XS Max. I have to say that I didn't really notice a difference between the X and the XS, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think we need to stop and appreciate what the iPhone is doing and how quickly it's doing it. The proximity sensor and light sensor determine what is needed for face recognition. Then the flood illuminator lights up your face. The dot projector creates a 3D map of your face. The infrared camera captures the images, which are then sent to the neural engine to build a 3D model of your face and compare that against the stored model taken during setup. That is an amazing amount of technology that happens in literally seconds and rarely fails. Would I like Face ID to be faster? Yes, of course, but I think it's pretty incredible what it's doing right now. The camera is where we get the main difference between the iPhone X and the XS. Simply put, it is a much better camera than the camera on the iPhone X, and this is due to a few things. One of those things Apple is calling Smart HDR. Basically what Smart HDR does is when you take a photo, the phone is actually taking a set of pictures at different exposures and merging them into one. These changes give you a much wider range of capability when taking photos in challenging lighting situations. Many of the low-light photos that I took on the iPhone X were noisy or blown out, and on the XS, they looked much nicer. They also changed how the portrait mode works in relation to the bokeh, or blurred background. You can now edit the amount of blur you want in the background, which gives you a little more control over how the end result will look. One thing that I think is cool with the adjustable background blur is that I think it can kind of give you a visual understanding of what adjusting the aperture can do to a photo. You also get a similar feature to Smart HDR in video recording up to 30 FPS, along with stereo recording, which you can definitely hear a difference. I think overall it's just an easier camera to get good photos with in a wider variety of situations. It seems like Apple really undersold how good the camera improvements are this year. So the iPhone XS and presumably the XS Max are really great phones, but I think you just needed to decide if it's worth it to you, as with last year, to spend this much money on a new iPhone. I think if you have the iPhone X, you should probably stick with the 10 and see what they come out with next year. But if you have something older, it might be a good year to upgrade. It's also worth noting that the iPhone XR is coming out later this month, and I think we'll want to look at that too, so maybe wait before you make a decision.